Hello everyone, it's your guy,
The Hat Man.
coming at you for another stupid YouTube video. And today, as we do every month on this channel, we're going to be going through and ranking all of the notable albums from the past month. The past month was March, which means we're now 4 months deep into 2023, which means I'm insane. But the thing that's been keeping me sane has been the good music releases. I know this is such a YouTuber thing to say, but seriously, stay until the end, because the way we're going to do this is first we're going to talk about the more mainstream releases, and honestly there's a couple of them that I'm not that into, but almost everything on the lower scale, which we'll do afterwards, I am super into. We rank them worst to best at the end, and that means that all of the best stuff from the month practically is going to be right there at the end. So the first one we're going to be talking about today, that is probably the most anticipated album of the year, Music by Playboi Carti. It is here. It is an album that has been rumored to exist basically for so long now. Bro practically announced it for 2024. Time comes and leaves. It's only delays. It's nothing but delays. Every time people thought he was gonna finally drop it, it didn't happen. And honestly, even with how confirmed it really was for the Friday that it finally dropped, I was personally very skeptical on whether or not it even would. Turns out it did. However, that last night before it came out is really all the proof you would ever need to show that Carti hates his fans, dude. The world was cursed by sleep-deprived Carti fans all day because this dude delayed it 5 hours last minute. At first, when it didn't come out at 12, I was like, hey, there's a blood moon tonight. Maybe he's being a little festive. That's kind of cute. That's kind of fun, right? Nope, blood moon comes and passes, nothing. But waking up to it, because I wasn't staying up any later than that, was a very surreal experience. And if that wasn't, it certainly was a surreal experience to see that it had 30 songs on it. So yeah, this was pretty much set up to be pretty bloated right from the get-go. Yeah, that 30-track runtime kind of makes the album experience non-existent for this one. It definitely flows a lot more like a mixtape, and that's only increased by the fact that you get these super frequent Swamp Izzo tags all over everything, and we see a lot of different Carti styles in here. It really kind of sounds like everything he's been doing at any various point between the most recent stuff, like think the Camila Cabello feature, to Die Lit era, really. He does some of the baby voice stuff, he does kind of the raspy vamp stuff, and he does his lower register thing that sounds like Future if he was more inebriated. But really, out of everything here, there's actually probably the least of that tone, of that style of Carti, and that was very nice to see. Literally upon booting up Pop Out, the first track, I already knew that I was probably going to like this a little bit more than I expected, because he was doing the whole lot of red type of thing over a very chaotic, industrial, experimental beat. That's honestly one of the best songs on the album, and I will fight you on that. But it stays very diverse throughout that. I could really touch on so many different songs. The Kendrick Lamar appearances, as many have said, are kind of weird for Kendrick at an optics level, but nonetheless, Backdoor's really cool. The other two, I could really take or leave. Few different Travis Scott features on here. They were fine, I guess. Like the Future one, very Pluto-ski, reminiscent in a way. And the Young Thug appearance was pretty cool, and the track that Young Thug is on, as far as I am concerned, might as well be the closer, because holy moly, it is an endurance test for that last like 8 tracks there. And honestly, this is going to be a very hot take, I realize, but I didn't really care for the deluxe either, because it essentially just extends that endurance test for 3 more tracks. It does give us a better closer, because I did mess with that last one quite a bit, but I'm not that big of a fan of the singles that weren't on streaming. Could have done without them, but like, it's fine, dude. Overall, this is definitely one that you listen through once to grab all the songs you want for your playlist, and that's probably why every song ended up charting. They're all very isolated to each other, and they all have a very different sound. So really how I would approach it is one full listen. If you're a fan of anything Carti has done in the past, pop those onto a playlist and never listen to the whole thing again, because God, why would you? It's so long for no reason. Alright, and the next for our big releases for the month, the second biggest I suppose, is MAYHEM by Lady Gaga. Now, this one was set up with the singles Die With A Smile, kind of, even though that one really felt like its own thing, and then Place at the end, but more so Abracadabra and Disease. And those songs are so awesome that it really left a huge amount of expectations for this album. But then, you gotta take a look at the fact that those are the first two songs on the album for some reason. Personally, I like Disease a little bit more than Abracadabra, and really Disease would have been the pop song of the year in 2024 if Brat wasn't overshadowing everything. That's such a banger. So you have this great single run in the beginning, back to back, and I seriously feel like every other song from that point forward is a little bit worse than the last. It's very consistent that is the experience, and that is so disappointing because it makes it kind of a demoralizing listen, and it's 50 minutes, I believe, if not even longer. It's pushing an hour is basically what I'm saying, which is generous to say the least. So realistically, it kind of ends up being one that's better on shuffle, or again, kind of just as playlist material, which is fine, I guess, for a pop album, but it really feels like in a way we're a little bit past that with the current state of pop. I'm thinking about the albums that really stood out recently. Hurry Up Tomorrow already made a reference to Brat, even Billie Eilish's album from last year as well. There's a lot of great pop albums coming out that are cohesive, that are consistent, and you can play the last song and it sounds like a closer, you can play the first song, sounds like an opener, everything goes together well, and I can't say any of the same things for this record. So it's a little disappointing for sure, but you do have quite a few bangers in that first half, even first 3 quarters really, that are absolutely worth listening to. The whole thing really isn't bad by any means. By the time we get all the way to the end, I'm still at positive scores technically. It's just that it tapers off, and that ends up making it not fun, and I'm coming to a Lady Gaga album for fun, obviously. It's still so hard to talk about it as positively as I feel about it, because if you actually take the songs, kind of average them out, do your thing with them, it's still a very good album. I think if no singles came out and it all just dropped at once, the first 2 songs would still be the ones that were bumping the most, but this whole album would just feel a little bit better instead of something I don't really want to come back to. Next up, we got Benny Blanco and Selena Gomez coming together for a collaborative album called I Said I Love You First. Now, I Said I Love You First is an interesting one because Benny Blanco does not usually do albums. He's usually just credited as a producer, and that's kind of that. And if you look back through his production credits through the years, there is very little genre consistency. I mean, you got 303 in there, for God's sake. But what does remain consistent is that for the most part, he's on whatever's popular. And oftentimes, if you really think about it, what that ends up meaning is that it's going to be pretty generic sounding stuff. So then pair him up with Selena Gomez, and it just makes a lot of sense. Despite being huge tier celebrity and having a pop career that spans back, I want to say over a decade, I can't think of Selena Gomez songs. When I hear her name, there's not a song that starts playing. She's a great vocalist, production-wise, songwriting-wise. She always has good songs to back her, and there's nothing I've ever really hated. It's just there's so hard to find anything to love. Basically, they're a match made in heaven for each other's style. It ranges from R&B to hyperpop to weird sampled interludes that exist for some reason, and no matter what it's doing, it always just kind of feels like an imitation of something else, a cheaper version really. So if you're really dying for store brand pop music, here you go, I guess. Alright, next up, it's another producer artist collaborative album, this time Saba and No ID, with a simply titled record from the private collection of Saba and No ID. So this is, I hate to admit, the first Saba album I've actually listened to, even if I've been meaning to get around to his stuff for quite some time. I have to say, I'm immediately impressed. This might not have been where I was supposed to, hop on, but he has great flows, a lot of charisma, great song ideas, knows how to execute that, and it's just a rapper that's good, just for the sake of being a rapper that's good. He's very skilled, he's very passionate, and almost always is just going above and beyond. That ends up kind of being the standout gimmick about him rather than any particular notable trend in his music. He doesn't necessarily stand out at first glance on this record, but over the time that you listen to this, you end up just respecting it. And No ID's presence is somewhat similar, really. He is a hip-hop producer that has been in the game for quite some time now, produced some classics, produced some great modern records, and he shows quite a bit of versatility because we do have songs that are wildly varied from the last all over this. The instrumentals are usually something pretty soulful and lean on some jazz type instrumentation, but that's not even enough of a consistent trope for this to lack variety in any way, shape, or form. That variation does make the album a little bit less consistent as a whole, but it doesn't take away from the enjoyability in any way. It's just a smooth, effortless, consistently enjoyable experience. And that's not always the case that it's like something easy, I guess. You definitely get that on something like Stomping or Crash, but then you can pair that up with something that's legitimately chilling and emotionally deep at a sincere level, like How to Impress God. That song really gets me every time it comes on. The only thing on here that's at least a little bit of a mixed bag in quality anyways is the features, but even then most of them do great. But overall, yeah, this is one that just delivers on every standard that you could want it to deliver on. It's a great record, it's a great listen, and out of all of the mainstream stuff that came out this month, I think I recommend this one the most. Alright, and I don't really know if NAV should be in the same discussion here. Popularity wise, is definitely like down a peg from some of these artists, but coming with us with On My Way to Rexdale, best album title since By the Time I Get to Phoenix. It's been a long time since I've bothered listening to NAV at all. I haven't really checked out his last 2 or 3 records, I don't think. I want to say the last thing I listened to was his collaborative album with Wheezy, Emergency Tsunami, and I can tell you for sure, On My Way to Rexdale is a lot better than whatever the hell they were cooking on that one. Here we pretty much see NAV diving full head on into pop rap and sort of a spacey R&B type of vibe. Doesn't really give you a lot to love. There's not a lot that stands out, but at least it's some music that you can play outside, and that's absolutely worth something. The beat switches that frequently pop up are pretty cool. I mean, like, we got a beat from Metro Boomin on here. There's some really nice production, and there is a feature from Carti, which is so weird. I swear, the group of people that he decides to hop on an album for is wild. But you got Don Toliver on here too on the second track. Improves it. I just can't bring myself to hate this record at all. I can't even really bring myself to dislike it. It's just kind of a vibe. Like, there's not really anything wrong with it. Alright, and next up we got Kanye West, Bully V1, I guess. Frankly, I refuse. But even if I didn't refuse, which maybe this is me not refusing, that I don't know. I did listen to part of this, and straight out the gate, you can tell so clearly, so bad, that these vocals are AI generated. And while some of these beats are probably okay, you can still find better stuff from independent producers. You know, dude, maybe we can still ride the He Made Graduation. I don't personally subscribe to that in the slightest. He's not making graduation anymore. All right, it is time to move on to the ranking of worst to best for our more underground albums. This is the exciting part. Holy shit, the top of this is crazy. The top 10 on this could be a top 10 of some years for me. I'm not even kidding. Yeah, it's amazing. And even before we do that, let's talk about today's sponsor.
Bugs.
They're in your skin.
Bugs.
Sign up for Bugs today. Get a free cockroach infestation for only $9.99 a month. You can also Bugs. Alright, so first album in the underground section for the month, Men I Trust. I like my fair share of folk, singer-songwriter, even ambient. I like to think that I'm a pretty patient listener. I'm not somebody who needs keys jangled in front of my face every second of the way. Do I like chaotic music the most? Probably, but you know, I can totally get behind some stuff that doesn't fit the bill. But this album really tested that as far as my opinion on myself goes. It is technically good on almost any standard that you could rank it on. If I had to critique anything, it would be the very hushed and quiet vocals, but even that's an aesthetic choice. But wow. This album, despite not really having anything technically wrong with it, bored me so much. I can respect this album, but I just can't enjoy it. Take it all with a huge grain of salt, because it's absolutely possible that this is just not my thing. Alright, I mean, we're still kind of in the mid-tier here. We got SASAMI, Blood on the Silver Screen. This is a pop rock record, somebody I haven't really listened to before, but first impressions wise, I can't say that I'm extremely impressed. Definitely got some good, catchy songwriting all throughout the record, fairly enjoyable in that regard. I can't say there's a lot I actively disliked. It's just that this is an aggressively alright album. It is so just okay. I mean, looking back at this point, I listened to it quite a while ago now, but I can't really remember any specific moments from it, and that's including the Claro feature. And with an album like this, you know, especially in kind of a more poppy realm of things, you definitely want everything to sound pretty clean, but you would think that mixing would play a lesser role in it as a whole than it really does here, because most of what I actually end up disliking about this record boils down to the mixing and production. All of it just sounds fine at best. This doesn't really hit with enough impact to scratch any kind of itch. Yeah, so it's unfortunately really falling short of some pretty okay potential that it had to begin with, but all around it wasn't really bound to be anything super great. Alright, and next up here is indie rockers My Morning Jacket. Kinda wanted them to impress me, unfortunately not so much the case. That's not to say I in any way really strongly dislike this record. In fact, the first half is something I would be totally willing to re-listen to again. I liked, to some degree, all of the songs that came before Let Me Know, but from that track on downwards, it's pretty much all downhill. And it's not a very long album, so you don't have to deal with it for very long once it goes downhill, but basically it's only the first half that I'm into in any sort of way. At those points, it's a very diverse album. I compared it in my written review to both Foo Fighters and the Beatles, but I really think that towards the end there, it goes into the dreaded car commercial music type of realm. For what it's worth, no production issues on this. It all sounds very clean. It sounds very nice. This is one that's worth a very passive listen if you're into this sort of thing. If you are an older viewer of this channel, definitely go give it a try. Otherwise, I can't say I'm actively recommending it, but it's still, it's a good record. It's fine for what it is. And wow, we're on a streak of rock records here that doesn't necessarily even end with this one, but it is the next one up. This is Spelling, or Spelling, if you will. Portrait of My Heart. Now, the only Spelling album that I've heard before this is The Turning Wheel, kind of an internet classic in the post-Fantano 10 out of 10 era. Personally, I can't say I was ever all the way there with it. even if it's a pretty okay one. I like how whimsical it is and that it dips into some rock, you know, like this album does for the most part, but it goes into some folk sections, it goes places, and it has some very beautiful imagery. This one, lot more typical, lot more accessible, and it is much more a rock album than it is anything else at all. Now we're going to end up with a pretty similar issue to the SASAMI record in that the way that it's mixed and produced should not play as big of a role as it does, especially considering how big and theatrical this is. You really wouldn't ever think that it would cause you any issues, but there's a few times on here that I'm really not digging it. But as a whole, I kind of am. I like some of the lyricism on here, but even more so, I like Spelling's performances. She is a great vocalist. The instrumentation has some great moments as well. I mean, these songs are well written, it's very catchy, and there's a few that stick with me, no doubt. Overall, I can't say that I get a whole lot from the greater concept of it or anything like that. If you're looking for some fun rock songs that are a little bit more of an artsy realm of things, you can't go wrong. And finishing up our little rock streak here, we got Courting with Lust for Life or How to Thread the Needle and Come Out the Other Side to Tell the Story. Yeah, no, it's just saying Lust for Life on the screen, dude. I'm not doing all that. But very long-winded title aside, pretty good album from them. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I actually enjoyed their previous sophomore album quite a bit as well when that came out last year, and I'm pretty excited to see that they came and followed it up with something so decent right after the fact, even if this feels a little bit more like an EP than it does an album. It's 8 tracks, which, you know, can be an album length for sure, but more of an EP length, and it's only 25 minutes, which you can say the same for. They haven't really had a lot of time to put something new together though, so unless this has been in the works for a while, I can absolutely get why it would be a shorter thing. For being an indie rock band like they are, this opening track is so crazy. I listened to this on the same night as Clipping. I listened to Clipping first and then this, and I had to check and make sure that I didn't actually just leave Clipping playing somehow, because it legitimately sounds that harsh and experimental. But past that, it's a lot of Courting getting in their regular indie rock bag with a lot of personality, a fun vibe overall, some decent writing, just a nice little fuzzy, noisy indie rock kind of vibe. And that's what New Last Name last year was. It was a lot of that, and I was really into that album. So for the most part, I really can't complain about what they're doing on here. The title track is the only other song on the album that really goes forth and breaks the mold for this band, because it has a lyrical concept that's pretty unique, tells a bit of a story, goes a different route with it, and it has sort of this country or folk vibe to it. According to the bio on Bandcamp, there's a mirroring effect to the tracks here. For example, the first track would be mirrored with the 8th, second to the 7th, going on, so on and so forth, and they're supposed to thematically relate, and the album is supposed to have the theme of duality. I thought that was worth mentioning, that it was something that they wanted you to know. For me, didn't really get that, didn't end up caring about that concept, but legitimately speaking, it's fine, because I had fun with the album anyways. Next up, we got something kind of rock, but not really. Well, a lot more punk, I suppose. This is Combust with their album Belly of the Beast, and I'll tell you what, man, I'm gonna combust, because this is a big ol' hell yeah. This shit rocks. You really gotta love some big, crunchy hardcore that just hits like a MFer, doesn't do any messing around. Just comes in, busts through. And while it's primarily punk and hardcore, beat down hardcore a lot of the time, very heavy stuff like that, it actually reminds me a little bit of thrash metal from time to time as well. And part of that may be due to the fact that the vocalist reminds me a bit of the vocalist of Slayer, oddly enough. Got plenty of guest vocal and instrumental features on here as well, and I think everybody's contributing something pretty alright. But man, the bass usage on here, good stuff, dude, good stuff. This is hype. It's fun. It's just a blast to listen to. So if you're into some big, crunchy, heavy stuff, look no farther. All right, and the next up we got here, MALNEEZY, Play It Like You Stole It, Volume 1. This is a long-awaited record from him and sort of just has the status about it in the albumoftheyear.org community. We've been waiting for this one for a while because that title track on here has been out, which is a collaboration that sounds fantastic, and the whole album is actually a collaborative work. MALNEEZY is a producer, and this album shows that he can work with just about anybody because this is such a versatile listen. The way it's all formatted is there's a feature, a vocal feature usually. Despite it being such a varied listen, it's kind of a consistent inconsistency, and the songs that are placed next to each other always end up making sense, which was cool and good to see. But really, overall speaking, the only actual consistency is quality consistency. And in whether it's a hip-hop thing, whether it's more of an industrial thing, whether it's kind of some Daft Punk sounding type shit, whether it's just some like straight up electronic stuff, maybe even a little bit of like a hyper pop type, whether it's a brighter song or something a lot more heavy and dark like his previous full album. You know, he's just doing it. He's just doing it, and it sounds pretty great, and that's very impressive. I'm not really into every single collaborator's performances. I guess you're just definitely going to end up with a mixed bag to some extent there. These are all fellow solo independent artists. You kind of really got the whole album of the year music community all over this thing, which was pretty cool to see. Nice little mixtape collaborative situation, and you know what? I think it was worth the wait. So it's a vibe, definitely worth giving a try to. All right, and next up we got Perfume Genius with Glory. Out of anything I've heard in my years of listening to music, Glory just might be the art pop album that sounds the most like art pop and what I would expect art pop to sound like. There's stuff on here that's very catchy, widely appealing, very easily likable, but there's also a deeper level of vulnerability in the lyricism and some more complex passages, some more experimental stuff. Certain tracks in particular will probably sound like nothing you hear too often. And there's just kind of a overall conceptual and vulnerable tone to the writing. It gets pretty emotionally deep, but sometimes it's something a lot more lighthearted too. You know, you got a very solid mix. And whether or not it's some of the more widely palatable and easily digested songs on the album, or it's some of the most conceptual, elaborate songs on the album, I end up enjoying it quite a bit. And the next one we got up here is another that was sort of submitted to me. So thanks for hitting up the Instagram Young Exile. He went ahead and sent me this record, Sincerely a Bastard. So this is a 12-track hip-hop project that definitely goes in some experimental realms. It is a pretty quick listen. It can be found on YouTube right now. You can definitely listen to the whole thing front to back and get a very, very enjoyable experience out of it. The day that he went ahead and sent me this on Instagram, I was actually going back and re-listening to King of the Mischievous South Volume 2 by Denzel Curry, and it really just hit the same vibe in a way that I wasn't expecting. Don't get me wrong, this is not exactly the same form of music or anything, but like it does dip into some of that southern hip-hop, general Memphis type of sound. Other times, especially on the like semi-title track to this album, Eulogy of a Bastard, really getting into some like scream stuff. So if you're into artists, say like Scarlord in particular, the scream vocals kind of reminded me of, and I mean that in a good way. Those bits will definitely be for you, and they were certainly for me as well. Just kind of goes hard in all of the ways that something can go hard. Another comparison I could make that sounds probably more negative than it is Suicide Boys. If you're into them, you'll probably be into this as well. And overall, some really great lyricism in here. We're really diving into some emotional themes, some political themes. He definitely didn't slack on that regard either. With more independent releases like this, I often try to give very specific feedback and be like, you know, I wish this little thing was a little bit different. But honestly, with Young Exile here, I kind of feel like it's there already. Most of this is self-produced, which is crazy because these beats sound amazing. Everything's very well balanced out, very well produced on here. It's just good. Like, it's just good. I don't really have much more to add besides it's good. And next up here, we have Spirit Box, a metalcore band, coming at us with their sophomore album called Tsunami Sea. Honestly, we're seeing a little bit of a revivalism in the core genres, really. This is probably the best I've heard since Knocked Loose last year. Now, a lot of that comes down to the vocalist that has an amazing dynamic range. If I had a nickel for every time this year I have heard a metalcore album and thought that there was two vocalists when there's actually just one, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. I can say the exact same phrase about the fact that I have listened to 2 metal songs in the last month called Black Rainbow that both have slight electronic influences. I don't know if you guys remember the Bong Ra album from last month, if anybody does. Same deal on there. That was weird. But yeah, anyways, these guys just sound fantastic. This goes pretty hard. It goes pretty heavy. I don't necessarily like some of the passages that are very far in the opposite of that because it does also get pretty calm, especially in the vocals. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. I mean, just take a look at, say, Linkin Park, for example. I love Linkin Park. Clean choruses and catchy stuff mixed with some heavy stuff. Nothing wrong there, and sometimes on here it is excellently executed, but I think it kind of says a lot that the track on here, Soft Spine, ends up being pretty easily my favorite, and it is one of the only ones that is extremely hard and heavy hitting throughout its entire duration. We got indie folk, art pop, singer, songwriter, Japanese breakfast coming at us with another one with a long title for Melancholy Brunettes and Sad Women. I guess it's kind of a long title, not really. I wasn't sure if I was going to qualify, wasn't sure if this was going to be for me. I only like halfway kind of meet these standards, but it worked out. I enjoy this one quite a bit. Now, I guess I am technically disappointed based on how much I liked Jubilee. That one feels much more ethereal, immersive, just has this magical little energy about it, and I can't necessarily say that for Melancholy Brunettes, but this album is every bit as pleasant, elegant, peaceful, and relaxing and immersive in those sorts of ways. It feels like this album is stylistically diverse while never necessarily breaking character, if you will, and it stays very consistent. Quality-wise, I like every song here. There are some that are a little bit too simplistic and don't necessarily have any of the more intensely dynamic arrangements that really were keeping me interested the most, but that's few and far between, thankfully. I mean, really, I am captivated by almost everything here, and lyrically, it was pretty dense. There's a lot to get from it. There's even a bit of a storyline going on, which was very cool. Very well-crafted themes, motifs in general throughout this that I did enjoy.
I also enjoy Bugs.
Bugs. $10.99 a month. But next up, Backwash, an artist that I have been practically following since she started making music at this point, which is kind of crazy. Only Dust Remains. We're about 5 years deep, maybe 6, maybe 7, something like that, into Backwash's career, and this is the longest gap we've seen from her in music in a full album release. I started listening around the time of the project God Has Nothing to Do With This, Leave Him Out of It, I want to say is the whole title of that one. Either way, it came out in 2020, and there has consistently been at least one major project every year since that point. She was pretty prolific for a while there, and it has been a whole 3 years nearly since we have seen a full project from her, so it was really going to be interesting to see just how much her sound had evolved since then. And it has changed. It has changed around. I can't say it's something that I necessarily like better or worse, at least in theory, at least in its general concept. The sound that she came up on was very heavy, very intense. It was in your face with some loud, brutal elements, some scream vocals and such. It was very metal influenced and very industrial, harsh, experimental, etc. And we've got something that is relatively calm here. Not calm in a general scope by any means, but relatively calm. It leans on a lot more spacey elements to include the similar darkness. It gets on some very dark themes, it is similarly emotional, and it just portrays that a little bit differently sonically. Overall, it does still have some rock influence, but not so much metal. There's even some psychedelic atmospheres to it. It ends up being a little bit of a trippy album, and that does kind of technically make for something a little bit more immersive, but it doesn't make for something that bangs quite as much as the older stuff does. So I would love to see a middle ground between this style and the style she came up on a little bit more. But nonetheless, this is fantastic, and there are some tracks on here that get so deep and impactful, both emotionally and politically, doing some commentary. It does a lot. It still hits. She's still hitting. She's still doing great. It's just not my favorite project from her necessarily. And this is a very similar one, especially for me, because this is another experimental hip-hop artist that I have been following since 2020. Clipping. They hit us back to back with the 2021 and 2020 releases of their horrorcore leading albums that had a Halloween type feel to them and were both released in October with very similar cover arts. I always figured that it was going to be a trilogy, but 2022 rolled around and no trilogy. No trilogy for us. And that was okay. I kind of just figured they were taking their time on it. They took their time. It's been 4 years now until we've seen a new one from them. It is Dead Channel Sky, and while it does have similarly intense elements, it is not necessarily the spooky horrorcore type feel. It doesn't have the same cover, so I guess the trilogy will never happen. I loved those records, but alas, it was not meant to be. However, I actually love Dead Channel Sky pretty much just as much, even though it is very different conceptually speaking. I would call this their money store, if that makes any sense as a comparison. You're literally hearing like dial-up internet connection sounds in the beginning of this album after the very fast, very intense intro, and it feels like you're plugged into the internet for the rest of this. It is like internet crimes, the album, whether that be scamming, trafficking drugs, ending up on a deep web onion link you probably shouldn't have clicked on, and seeing some shit you didn't want to see. It's violent, it's edgy, it's got that internet spirit to it that is awesome, and I really dig. No pun intended. Even the song Welcome Home Warrior is much more lighthearted, I suppose, but is nonetheless very online, with it kind of being about getting some escapism through online games or an online presence and having a little bit more control over your life. And that one actually contains a feature from Aesop Rock, which was so exciting to see on the track list when they first announced the entire album's track list, which is very long and included an Aesop Rock feature. I have not really heard of the other names on here, but Aesop Rock is not even my favorite feature to land on here. In fact, I'd have a pretty hard time choosing who does. You know, they were greatly selected features when one of my favorite rappers is not even my top pick. And of course, Daveed Diggs, the vocalist here, the rapper, is still one of the best out as far as fast flowing deliveries and packing so much information into one thing. If you want somebody who can rap intensely and you want it to sound amazing, this is the guy. Technical skill wise, maybe the best out. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, and he kind of just has one vibe, which is intense. And maybe the singing stuff, maybe anything more relaxed, not quite as good. But when he's doing his thing, whoa, amazing. But the other two parts of the duo handling the production end of things are also amazing at what they do. The atmospheres here are insane. The sound design, which I don't usually use the term sound design for music, that seems more like a movie or a game thing. But the way that it plays out is very much like sound design, with how it hits you in your headphones, how you're going to be listening to this. Truly some of the best production if you're looking for something more experimental, more in an industrial type realm. And wow, dude, it makes for such an amazingly enjoyable experience for anyone into this sort of thing. Alright, and continuing our streak of absolutely phenomenal albums. This is probably my hottest take in the entire video, but next up here we got Lucy Dacus, Forever Is a Feeling. This is my favorite singer-songwriter album in quite some time. Realistically, nothing is coming to mind since Phoebe Bridgers' last album, which is another of the three members of Boy Genius, of course. Yeah, Lucy Dacus's last album was amazing. This one did not disappoint on any front. On screen are a few, but not all, of the reasons I cried while listening to this. And what's crazy is that all of those are just individual lines. Where this album shines the most lyrically is actually entire verses. We got the song on here with Hozier called Bullseye, and I just started writing down like the entire verses when I was picking and choosing specific lines. It's truly such a sweet listen, but also such a sad listen at times. Really hits right in the nice emotions. And I can't say that I love the sound of it on every single track. There's a couple that go in more of a country type style rather than a singer-songwriter type of style, which I didn't enjoy as much, but all around, it sounds very elegant, very pretty, and it just kind of checks the singer-songwriter boxes. I think that Lucy Dacus is also a phenomenal vocalist for this sort of thing, and she sounds great across it. So man, like, there's just nothing for me to complain about. And I can tell that this is an album that's going to be sticking with me, which I can't actually say for the previous Boy Genius album. And I wasn't really sure why, especially since people seem to enjoy that one quite a bit. I kind of expected that album to be something I came back and replayed some more, because I did also score it decent. But this album made me figure out why that one didn't stick with me. It's because the three of them all have something very intimate and personal about their style of songwriting. And it's a very similar style with the three of them. So you would think that it'd be kind of a dream team, but realistically, when they're not on their own, you just don't get the same effect. But this is what I wanted from that album. This is what I want from a Julian Baker or Phoebe Bridgers album. Hopefully Julian Baker's collaborative album coming out soon ends up scratching some of the same itches as this one did. However, that is a collaborative album, so probably not. We can only hope now that Phoebe Bridgers will come through at some point this year. Yeah, man, we're still in the holy shit realm with Hesse Cassel, an up-and-coming Chilean noise rock and art rock band. And wow, I am blown away by this one. It's been a little while since we've gotten one of those debuts that's like crazy with how good it is. But it seems like it happens in these artsier forms of rock every once in a while. I remember it being the case a ways back for Black Midi, a ways back for Black Country New Road, and a little bit less far back with something like Freako. Last year, Freako was pretty impressive. This is more impressive than Frico. This is the most impressive debut I've seen in quite some time, because I have no idea just how they got such a good grasp on the noise rock style. To bring Black Country New Road back up, the comparisons to that band are certainly inevitable, because the vocal style we're working with here is sort of a monotone, shouted, spoken, almost just spoken word in general, poetry type of vibe, where a lot of the times it's not melodies on top of the instrumentals, it's more just somebody erratically yelling at you, which certainly has its place. But despite the vocal style being very similar to that first Black Country New Road record, that is pretty much where the similarities end. This is something so much darker and heavier than especially the more recent Black Country New Road stuff is. It is intensely, brutally heavy. The last two tracks in particular blew me away in that regard. 8-minute instrumental track with the 7th song on here, and it's just like beating you to death until you ascend to the heavens. And then the closer is even longer. It is so chaotic, and it is so dark and heavy. And the rest of the album preceding that, the 6 tracks that come before it and almost hour of music that comes before it, is not a lot brighter. Now, unfortunately, since this is a Chilean band, all of the lyrics are in Spanish. I say unfortunately like it's a bad thing. That is not a bad thing. In general, it's not a bad thing. It is for me, however. I feel like there must be a lot of cryptic and strange imagery going on across this album, because when reading translations and trying to gather the point, more oftentimes than not, I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I really tried to just not overthink it, lyrically speaking. So you would think that that would massively hinder my enjoyment when the lyrical themes, the focus of it conceptually, often kind of relies on being able to accept the lyrics, see what it's all about. But nah, dude, I've been re-listening to this, even though I don't really know entirely what the point is of what's being said at all moments. I would absolutely love to do a little bit of a deeper dive, maybe try to approach the translations a few different ways, but really, the sound of it is what's going to take the front seat for me anyways, which isn't really often the case with post-rock and art rock stuff, but it is so overwhelming here that it's absolutely the case. This is an almost perfect album. It's hard to really find much to complain about. As I dive more into it, as I re-listen to this, it might become a 10, and I can say that for everything coming up, which is insane. And next up is Deaf Heaven, Lonely People with Power. And it is always nice to see something completely blowing away my expectations entirely. That is absolutely what this album did, because I am not a fan of black metal. I am not even a fan of Deaf Heaven's last album at all. I was okay with that one. None of it really stuck with me. Sunbather, it's been a long time since I've revisited, and I don't even think I was into things quite as harsh and abrasive as that album tends to be some of the time, back when I first listened to that. So I absolutely do need to go check that out and give it a re-listen. But even considering the legendary notoriety that that album has, this has got to be Deaf Heaven's best. I can't see any way around that. It would blow my mind if they've outdone this. And most of that comes down to the band's desire and ability to explore new things, explore new sounds. And what sets Deaf Heaven apart from other black metal contemporaries the most is sort of an emotional appeal to it, rather than just kind of trying to be dark and brutal and edgy for the sake of it. You could say that the biggest thing setting them apart is their lighter and softer style as a whole, this sort of dream pop, chamber pop influence that comes into their sound, but those things go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other entirely. Both sonically and lyrically, this has a huge appeal, and so much to like in that regard. It is a well-rounded and conceptual piece as a whole. I could really spend a lot of time diving into specific tracks, picking apart certain meanings, but at the end of the day, we don't got all day here. But yeah, It's a beautiful experience. It's an emotional experience, and that's what's setting it apart and making it particularly great. Not that the dark, heavy, edgy, brutal stuff doesn't have anything to offer. Hence our next pick. And this pick is Whitechapel, Hymns in Dissonance. Holy shit, dude. If you told me Whitechapel was gonna come out with one of the most viscerally, disgustingly, brutally heavy albums I will hear all year, almost certainly, I would not have believed you for a second. It's not like they're entirely washed or anything. The Valley in particular was pretty good, and that's only a couple albums back now. I didn't mind their last album either. I thought it was pretty okay, and you know, it's been a band that I'm still okay with what they put out, but they're a little bit washed. They're a little bit washed for sure. Not anymore in the slightest. This has got to be their best album. That is kind of crazy because the Somatic Defilement, I believe is the name of that first record, is kind of a deathcore classic. But looking back on it, it's kind of the time. With Hymns in Dissonance, the time is now. For decades, metal and rock artists have been accused by the Christian church of selling their soul to the devil for fame and notoriety. On this album, it does not sound like Whitechapel sold their soul. It sounds like the devil came knocking and they let him in with open arms. I'm sure most of us here are aware of the concept of playing music backwards to get a subliminal message. When you play the music forward here, Phil Bozeman, the madman, is screaming some of the lyrics backwards. That's insane. I love that so much. That is insane. That is an insane thing to do. This takes everything you'd be familiar with in deathcore, plays it better, heavier, more creatively than anything you've heard in the genre in quite some time, maybe ever. And it's so well produced too. We got a decent bit of bass in it, but especially the drums. Holy shit, it's so big and crunchy and just hits you over the head. They went the extra mile. They put a lot of thought, care, and effort into this one. And that also shines through on the concepts that are explored on this album. And that is because the first tracks are meant to be excluded as a bit of an opener, as walking up to the gates of hell, if you will. And then past that, the tracks are supposed to each represent the 7 deadly sins, and that's so fun. This album is just as demonic and crazy as it looks, and I never expected that. There's absolutely a lot of alternate dimensions where I just skipped over this one because I'm like, it's just another deathcore album, like this isn't gonna do that much for me. I'm much happier for the reason that I did not skip over it. This is some legendary tier angry music, and I liked it even better than the Pissgrave album that we talked about last time. Do not skip it if you're into anything heavy. Alright, second to the highest, got Huramic, Seeking Darkness. It's another post-rock album, and it's insane. So this is actually a pseudonym of shoegaze artist Parannoul, who we have talked about at least a few times on here, and who has been consistently releasing some peak music as far as the rock genre goes. This is in a totally different direction, hence the different pseudonym, I suppose, and he does it just as well, if not significantly better. It is hard to know where to even begin with an album like this that is such a post-rock monumental experience. And that can be said for many proper post-rock experiences that are just like this one and can be consumed and digested in a similar way. The thing that this reminds me the most of is Godspeed You Black Emperor, and honestly, I think I'd be more likely to turn this on than a Godspeed album at this point. We've got 5 tracks, each of them spanning quite a bit of length, and there's really only one section where it loses me in any sort of way, and that is the calmer section of the 3rd track, which should work for me because it sounds the most similar to what Parannoul traditionally does. It's got a little bit more of that calming shoegaze quality, but I guess it seems like it kind of sticks out here, and I guess I kind of like the sound of this album even more than what Parannoul usually does. So it sticks out in a way that I don't love quite as much, but it's also very cool because it's a little bit of a calm before the storm type of moment and gives us some depth, gives us some variety. This is a varied listen. It is very transcendent. It progresses in a consistent, solid way. This does almost everything perfectly, and it accomplishes exactly what it needs to do, and that is why it gets a near perfect score from me. Alright, so here we are at our final one. Ghost Mountain, October Country. Looking at the albums that came before it, maybe this doesn't deserve, at like a strictly measuring the sound level, to be higher than the ones that came immediately before it, but this album is a little piece of my soul already. I made a whole short video kind of explaining the Haunted Mound lore. What you need to know briefly is that Ghost Mountain left about 4 years ago. Nobody ever thought he'd come back to music at all. Nobody ever thought he'd be coming back to Haunted Mound, and there was kind of this looming thing in the collective's presence of Haunted Mound, which is the very aesthetic-driven collective that he's a part of, with artists like Cemetery, where it was just kind of like, it's not quite the same without Ghost Mountain, because the most classic Haunted Mound projects have his presence, and it's very significant, very notable. Albums like 100 Acre Wrist, for example. Classic. But nonetheless, last year, we saw him come back for 2 individual singles, one of which being a Cemetery collaboration, and everybody figured, you know, this will probably lead up to an album. And it did, but just not really in the way we expected. It's coming out 5-6 months after the last single, and those singles are not included. Instead, we get an entire 12 tracks that are all new here, and it really exemplifies exactly what made those early Haunted Mound songs great when they were aided by Ghost Mountain. Much of the collective's music is very Chief Keef, very trap influenced in general. This doesn't really do that. It is very sentimental. It's more of an emo rap thing, if you could specifically tie it down to anything. He is the best lyricist in the collective by far. Like, even though I do like the campy nature of a lot of the other Haunted Mound stuff, but this sticks with the whole vibe aesthetically. It doesn't necessarily have a lot of like horror references and stuff, but it stays very much within that fall aesthetic. It's called October Country, and it feels a bit like October, which makes me kind of wonder why he didn't drop it in October. I will tell you, this has been one that I have spun a lot, and it will probably be on for the entirety of October when October rolls around, if it ever even leaves the rotation at all. As just someone who's been following Haunted Mound for, I guess, practically 5 years now, and have looked to their music, especially the older music that of course has always been there, as some form of consistency during a crazy time period in my life. This one means so much to me to see, but it actually lived up to expectations too. Like, this doesn't seem like the sort of thing that would live up to expectations, but it absolutely does. This is probably the best collection of tracks we've seen from any Haunted Mound member as a cohesive, consistent project. It's not too bloated, there's not any misses, it's a little bit varied, just enough to remain interesting throughout the entire listen, but stay very cohesive and very consistent. And I wrote practically a book of a written review on Album of the Year. If you want to hear more thoughts on it, I guess go check that out. I'm trying to sum up my thoughts right now as best as I really humanly can. I am planning on coming back in another 5 years, re-reviewing this and seeing if I want to give it that final 1% to make it a perfect album, because I don't want to be blinded by recency bias and by the fact I wanted this album to be a 10, obviously. It's sitting 99% right now. It's got some of my favorite songs of the year. It is my favorite album of the year so far. And if April is anywhere near as crazy as March was, it's going to have some tough competition. It's going to have to really put up a fight. And May's releases, like looking at that month, whoa, dude. Whoa. Insane. We're certainly not done with it being a crazy year for music in 2025 and a crazy year for everything. So remember to hang in there. We're having a go at it, but hang in there. It'll get better. And make sure to like the video, subscribe, turn notifications on for more music related content coming your way. And I will see you in the next video.